A young boy flees Palestine, never to return. He dreams of a country at peace, an independent country at peace. As he grows older, his lofty hopes diminish. The belief in being able to change the world hits a cold reality. And then a spark of inspiration. He discovers that persuasion is perspective first. Let's do this. Hi, it's Zoe, and this podcast is about leadership perspectives. We want to build better cultures and inspire boundless leadership. I had an interesting discussion about perspectives with this young Palestinian man. Well, he was no longer that young. He'd been away from his country for 20 years and working all around the globe in not-for-profits, NGO-type organizations. And I asked him about this perspective of how he lost his hope, I guess, about changing the world. I said, tell me about that. What do you mean? What happened? And he said, well, when he was younger and when he'd left Palestine and fleeing the conflict there, he was really a passionate advocate about an independent Palestine. And he was really an advocate for right versus wrong, his perspective on right and his perspective on wrong. And then he realized that was going nowhere and it was going to change nowhere fast. He ended up in Afghanistan and doing some of his work, and he remembers listening to the people of Afghanistan, their perspective on the conflict and how their country would come to peace or not come to peace. And he realized, observing them and listening to them, that they were single-minded in their viewpoint, that they were only willing to look at the world to their own lens. And when they saw the enemy as an intractable enemy, and not as human beings, as fellow human beings, as fellow co-creators, he knew that they would be stuck in their perspective and would never get any traction in bridging the gaps between them. That was his moment of insight. He realized that as a young person, most of his life, he'd spent the same sort of experience in tunnel vision of black versus white, of my perspective versus your perspective. And he worked out that was never going to solve any conflicts at all. From a leadership maturity point of view, this is actually a massive turning point for any leader. Once you realize that all of us have a piece of the truth, have our own respective truths, and that there are multiple perspectives on any given issue, we get less attached to us advocating for our personal truth and get more interested in exploring other people's truths. When this happens, we start to cling less strongly to our ideals, and this allows us flexibility in developing creative and innovation responses that are more inclusive and more collaborative and more compassionate. So for my young Palestinian friend, this was a huge moment of awareness. And when you look at the number of conflicts around the world, we need this kind of awareness. At the moment, there's about 40 active conflicts around the globe. And 3 of them have been happening for at least 70 years, since 1948. Myanmar, Kashmir, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, going on for at least 70 years. That's a long time, with roots in historical tensions for a lot longer than that, I imagine. So I guess the question is, if you are sitting in a strong point of view, how do you convince someone of your point of view, of your perspective? Here's a couple of mistakes. Passion. Passionate advocacy alienates. I am sure you have been on the receiving end of some passionate diatribe from somebody who's had a recent breakthrough, transformational experience. Things like a recent non-smoker. They're often the most volatile. Or a new diet advocate. Or, I love this one, I've been on the receiving end of this many times, the newly signed up pyramid scheme person, whether it's doTERRA or Amway or Arbonne, you name it. There's a number of these different schemes, and I get it. Like, you can see the potential of the business, and that's because the pyramid scheme, or I should say multi-level marketing, is very persuasive in selling the benefits of this kind of business model. And so you think, if I just get all my friends to sign up and buy bleh, I will have residual income for the rest of my life and I can work less or give up work altogether. It's a beautiful dream. The reality is something quite different. In any case, if if you've ever been on the receiving end of a passionate advocate in a multi-level marketing scheme, you know how off-putting their conversation is. You know that it's one way. You know that they're just trying to get you to sign up for stuff, and it gives you that icky, I'm being used feeling. So passionate advocacy, whether it's for multi-level marketing or whether it's in sharing your leadership perspective, can be really off-putting. For me, I guess I've had this experience too. When I first experienced coaching some 20 years ago, like as a coachee, it was so transformational for me. I had to tell everyone about it. This was the personal development solution. Even though I've been doing personal development in the outdoor experiential space for 20 years, this was the new thing, the biggest and best thing to do. And I couldn't help it. Just told everyone. How many people signed up and got a coach after that? 0. There's nothing like the passionate advocate to think, ugh, the crazy person. I guess I've been a little bit like that around thought leaders. Thought Leaders is a community I joined 5 years ago to help me transform my own practice as a professional. And it has been life-changing for me. And I've been very happy to spruik it and talk about it for many years, trying to convince other people that this is the way forward for them. I've since come to realize that the path for me is not the path for everyone. And it takes grace to share your insight without telling people that this is what they must do. So the first mistake is passion. The second mistake in terms of trying to change people's perspective is pressure. Oh, there's so many awful examples of people applying pressure to make a change. And if you look at the Aussie farm protests, have you ever seen that in the news lately, where they published a map of Aussie farms, and basically, from the farmer's point of view, this has been a roadmap to where you can go and protest and sabotage farms. Whether or not you agree with industrial farming practices or even local farming practices in many cases, it is not acceptable to go and storm people's property illegally and pressure people to changing their activities. And how many of them have changed their activities? 0. It's not the right way to persuade people. This kind of pressure is, again, it's not just alienating, it can cause resistance and aggression in return. I remember walking down the street, and this is another example on a personal case, as a teenager with my girlfriend, who was she was an active vegetarian. What I mean by active, I mean a vegetarian for personal political reasons. Like, she was pro-animal rights, anti-animal abuses, I guess. I'm a vegetarian, though the reason for my vegetarianism initially is because I really don't like eating meat. I don't like the taste. She was different. She was militant. So we'd walk down the street. I remember walking past a lady. She was wearing this full-length fur coat, and my friend made some shaming remarks about having blood on her hands and that she was a killer and so on. Just raining abuse on a complete stranger about her choice of coat. Full on. I was just mortified. I'm like, I don't know what she was hoping to achieve. Like, did she think that the lady said, "Oh, you were so right. I'm going to never buy a fur coat again. You've just changed my mind by shouting at me"? No, of course not. Like, that kind of pressure doesn't work. And yet we see this kind of communication happening all the time in public spaces these days on social media. So a diatribe against somebody else's practices or beliefs is never going to change their beliefs. In fact, it just makes them dig in their heels more. Why? It's because it's an attack. It's someone imposing their perspective on someone else. And no one likes that. I don't like it. It's strong-arming. And this kind of pressure is pushy. And if you're pushing your perspective, you're alienating people. So the question then is, all right, if you really do have strong beliefs and values that you think are worthy of the greater good, how then do you share your perspective and invite people to the table? The key is persistence, not like the pressured way and not with the passion way. And I think with persistence, there's a couple of key elements. I think we can inspire others by how we show up. who we are by modeling what it means to live by our values and being humble about it. It's not necessarily what we do, it's the characteristics that we demonstrate behind what we do. And that is a subtle level of persuasion that has more power in it than pressurizing people or slurping passion all over them. Can you slurp passion? I guess you might be able to. So once you do that, the next piece is compassionate inquiry. I think this is one of the critical aspects of persuasion, is if we show compassionate curiosity about other people's perspectives, like my Palestinian friend, he got very interested in where people are coming from, and he started to get curious about that. What's behind their perspective? What is driving this particular set of beliefs? And as he did that, he became less pushy and more attractive because he showed he was open to caring, open to understanding, and open to new ideas and new suggestions. This is the most powerful way to be persuasive, is to be curious and humble. It's not fast. This kind of persuasion, of showing up consistently in curiosity and dripping our own perspective in addition to somebody else's perspective, not in lieu of, is a very slow way to persuasion. And I think that's why people don't necessarily advocate it. But this is how we can be persuasive in our perspective. It's with curiosity and with compassion that we can start to make a contribution. I'd love to hear how you have had your perspective changed by someone, and whether it was through pressure or passion or some sort of persistence in how people showed up. In the meantime, live well, lead well.